What is the scariest horror movie ever? Some say it's The Exorcist, others may say it's Hereditary, or maybe even Sinister. But did you know there's a horror movie based on a true story that will make all those movies seem like childish play? In today's video, we're gonna be taking a look at the scariest horror movie ever made. And no, it's not called Annabelle Comes Home. So without further ado, let's get started. Like I said in the intro, this is not your usual horror movie. This is a found footage style movie about two demonologists who go to a house that is rumored to be haunted by demons. And if you've seen any found footage movie before, you know that they usually start off with the people filming saying, "Oh, this is gonna be great footage for our documentary." And then you just know that something bad is gonna happen to them. Anyway, these two demonologists were brothers named Ed and Lorraine Warren. They weren't just any demonologists though. They were actual demonologists. That means that they were actually hired for jobs like this. Now the home that they went to was located in Harrisville, Rhode Island. It was here where some really messed up stuff had happened. According to the previous owners of the home, they had experienced regular paranormal activity, like how their furniture would move around while no one was home, and how they would hear things moving around. Now, these are pretty common things to happen in haunted houses, but what happened next was definitely not. See, one day the family was performing a seance, and that's when things got crazy. During the seance, they began to experience things that they couldn't explain. Their daughter was levitating. They were hearing footsteps above them, and objects began flying through the air. After this, they knew they needed to leave. And that's why the Warrens were called in. So now Ed and Lorraine are driving up to this creepy old house. The house looks abandoned. The windows are boarded up, and there's just an overall eerie vibe to it. Once they got inside, things didn't look much better. There were cobwebs everywhere, and the place just seemed really unwelcoming. As they walked up the stairs to the second floor, Lorraine began to feel uneasy. She felt a cold spot, and she also noticed that the air smelled like feces. So far, this house was looking way worse than any haunted house I've ever been to. They continued on to the second floor, and that's where they met Roger and Kathy. These were the people who currently owned the house. And they told the Warrens about all the strange things that had been happening to them since they moved into the house. As Lorraine and Ed began investigating, they realized that the house had a very dark history. The original owner of the house built it back in 1736, and it turns out he wasn't exactly the best person. You see, he chained up and beat his slaves. He also chained up his own son because he didn't want him to escape. And because of all this, the home became known as the Devil's Box. It turns out that all the paranormal activity that Roger and Kathy were experiencing was nothing compared to what the Warrens were about to experience themselves. One night, Lorraine woke up in the middle of the night and she saw something terrifying standing at the foot of the bed. She described it as a tall, thin man wearing a powdered wig. She also said that it was hunched over and it looked very old. Lorraine was so scared that she hid under the covers until morning. And even then she was too afraid to get out of bed. Ed, being the brave demonologist that he was, got out of bed and began investigating. He used a special camera to identify the energy around the room, and it turns out that the energy reading was -9. To give you some context, anything below 0 on this scale is considered extremely negative. So a -9 is about as bad as it gets. This meant that the entity that they were dealing with was pure evil. At this point, Lorraine was so freaked out that she wanted to leave the house immediately. But Ed convinced her to stay just a little bit longer so they could investigate more. Now, what happens next is arguably the scariest part of the whole movie. You see, Ed decided to try and communicate with the entity. And he asked it a simple question: "What do you want?" Well, the response that he received was not verbal. Instead, the room began to shake violently. The closet doors flung open, and all the nails in the walls began to fall out. At this point, Lorraine was terrified. She didn't want to be in that house another second. But just as she was about to run out the door, the lights turned off and she couldn't find Ed anywhere. She began calling out for Ed, but there was no reply. Then suddenly, she heard a voice behind her saying, "He's not here, I am here." Lorraine turned around, but there was no one there. Then she felt something grab her ankle and pull her down the stairs. Lorraine screamed at the top of her lungs, but no one could hear her. She tried to make herself barf, but nothing came out. Then she felt something wet trickle down her leg. And when she looked down, she saw that she was bleeding. A lot. She ran to the bathroom and looked in the mirror, and that's when she saw the most horrifying thing. Her eyes were completely black. Lorraine spent the rest of the night in that bathroom. She didn't come out until morning. And when she finally emerged from the bathroom, she had no idea how she got down the stairs. She also had no memory of anything that happened after she felt the entity grab her ankle. Lorraine and Ed left the house as soon as they could. After they left, Roger and Kathy decided to burn the house to the ground. They didn't want to deal with whatever it was that they were summoning in that house anymore. And honestly, I don't blame them, but it turns out that the burning of the house was a mistake. You see, the entity that they had summoned in the house had taken over one of the daughters, and she had convinced her parents to burn the house down. What the daughter didn't realize was that by burning the house down, she had released the entity that had possessed her in the first place. Ed and Lorraine were later called back to the house to perform an exorcism, and they brought along a priest named Father Gordon. The three of them stood in the rubble of the house and performed the exorcism. During the exorcism, the daughter began to thrash around and she began speaking in different voices. She claimed that there were many entities inside of her and each one was more powerful than the last. During the exorcism, the daughter broke free and she lunged at Father Gordon. She scratched up his face and knocked him out cold. This meant that Lorraine had to step in and take over. She grabbed a cross and began waving it around, telling the demons to leave the girl's body. It took all three of them working together, but they were eventually able to drive the demons out of the house. After the exorcism, the house was rebuilt and Lorraine never went back. The movie ends with her reflecting on the case and warning people about what might happen if they mess around with things that they don't understand. The scariest part about all of this is that it's true. Every single thing that I just told you happened in real life. There are news articles and police reports to back up everything that I've said. Even the exorcism was recorded. Unfortunately, the recording hasn't been released to the public, but there are transcripts of it. Now, whether or not you believe in demons and possessions is up to you. But one thing that you can't deny is that this story is terrifying. So if you ever find yourself in a situation where you're dealing with something that you can't explain, maybe just leave it alone. It might be better that way. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please make sure to subscribe so you won't miss out on any more videos. Also, if you have a scary story that you want me to read, please send it to my email. You can also send in video clips or links to podcasts. Just please make sure that you give me permission to use your story. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.